Alright guys, I think it's pretty fair to say that Elbaf has already been full of some truly insane reveals, like Vigil and Shamrock here, the Holy Knight's weird plan to recruit Loki into the God's Knights, and of course the idea that sometimes, just sometimes, the Sun God might actually be a god of destruction. But something that has been standing out to me for quite a while now is that I know Oda has been doing something really weird and sneaky with Prince Loki. Because you see, I do think that there's finally enough evidence in the story and implications to say that Loki is actually innocent and that Elbaf might be on the verge of a complete breakdown and takeover. So I do think we need to start investigating his case and figure out who might have framed Loki, why they would be wanting to do so, and what that would mean for the rest of the entire Elbaf arc. And I'm gonna be putting myself out there a little bit because obviously this theory might be proven wrong or right pretty soon, so we'll see which one happens. But let's start with my reasoning here, because I think that Loki is innocent. To me, it seems like stuff surrounding this guy is all full of contradictions, lies, and a lot of confusion. I mean, sure, he is named after the trickster god of Norse mythology, but he seems pretty straightforward, I'd say. I mean, look at this. In chapter 1130, he tells us his main goal pretty clearly. I'm the sun god who brings the world to an end, Loki. And he's been pretty much sticking to that logic, I'd say. So why do I think this dude, out of all people, is actually good and got betrayed? Well, how about we start with the fact that, as far as I can see it, he has surprisingly many parallels with some of the Straw Hats. For one, we learned that he's actually friends with all the underworld animals, something that Luffy does in his own life and is regarded as a pretty good trait, not just in One Piece, but really in any story, someone who's friends with the animals. That's as Disney as it gets. And actually, while we're talking about Luffy here, he does seem to somewhat trust Loki, at least enough to want to free him for his intel on Shanks, something very unlike Luffy actually. And since I know that everyone who watches my videos is pretty smart, you will know that despite his goofy personality, Luffy's actually a pretty good judge of character when it comes to first impressions and people's true natures. And seeing as he asked if Loki was a good guy in chapter 1136, it does seem like he may be doubting Loki's villainy himself as well. But we have even more than that, of course, as this mysterious character Mosa Loki is seen communicating with via transponder snail claims that Loki has a very kind heart. And let's also not forget that during the Lola flashback, which I'm really not sure how that fits in Whole Cake Island, the first time Loki is ever mentioned in the story, we actually do see Loki being a cute guy and giving Lola a flower. My point here is, despite everything we're being told, this guy to me just does not seem like a straight up bad guy. He just kind of seems a little bit misguided. When the giants say he caused destruction and chaos with his pranks and antics in chapter 1136, but that's not the first time obviously in One Piece that a hero has done this in this show. I mean, Luffy and Ace, take those guys, they were both really chaotic children, and Loki's story pretty directly seems to parallel big parts of Kozuki Oden's story as well, a dude who used to get into all sorts of trouble that caused chaos all over Wano, and a man that went on to sail with the Pirate King himself. And I want you to really think about this because I think that Loki being a good person with some bad traits makes a lot of sense. After all, we're being told that he killed his dad and that he didn't have a mother growing up, and that normally isn't exactly like a recipe for a really well-rounded person, not typically at least, and I kind of feel like all of this additional context that we've been getting about Loki being a sweet and kind person, despite his pranks and chaos, wouldn't be really necessary if he was a truly bad guy, right? I think you agree. Instead, he seems to be more good-intentioned with a really harsh and hard exterior, much like Oden or even someone like Frankie originally during his introduction as well. After all, think back. Frankie, Zoro, like all of these heroes that we now know have lives filled with murder, brutality, and a lot of destruction and trauma. And since I realized exactly that, I kind of started to wonder if Loki here was actually being framed for something, or at least being heavily manipulated by some outside force here. You know, someone that told him being the god of destruction could save Elbaf, or someone that made him feel like he needed to kill his own father. And based on some of the big reveals we've now been getting in chapter 1137, I've kind of narrowed it down to 3 main suspects here. So let's dive into the most obvious and the biggest one first, Jeru. Alright guys, basing it off on what we've seen in Big Mom's backstory and everything that we've seen in Elbaf so far, Jeru was a former captain of the Giant Warrior Pirates, something that I want you all to make a quick note of because I think it's gonna be important later on. We know he's a hero of the Giants and is currently the chief of Elbaf and also one of the oldest beings alive. Now to be fair, I can't quite tell if he's the chief or just a chief, but based on everything that we're getting about how the giant society really works and his relation to King Harold and Loki, to me it kind of feels like he's sort of the interim in-place leader of the country after Harold and Loki's battle to the death. Not officially the king, but kind of taking care of everything. Let's also not forget that Jeru is also the only person who survived Loki and Harold's battle and got a sword shoved through his head as well, but in a weird spot that somehow miraculously did not kill him, apparently. And so, with everything I just said, don't you agree that that is all kind of a little bit suspicious? Like, the current leader of Elbaf is the one guy, who survived Loki and Harold's legendary battle and only got put into that position after Loki escaped Elbaf and then was eventually caught and imprisoned by Red Hair Shanks. Something smells like poopy to me. Also, with that all in mind, why did Loki leave after killing his father? I mean, logically, wouldn't a straight up battle to the death between Loki and his father lead to him being the new ruler of Elbaf? Like, why would he just escape to sea afterwards as he apparently did? Well, thinking about it, to me, the best reason would probably be because even though he thought that he'd taken the throne, someone actually ended up spinning the story the completely other direction and forced Loki to go on the run. And again, I think there is no person with a better motive here than the one guy who was actually there and probably told the story, Jeru. Okay, what does he actually mean by that? Here's the deal, guys. Jeru is the oldest person or being in Elbaf as far as we know. He is over 400 years old and has seen the world go through many, many changes. When you think about it, he goes halfway back to the Void Century itself. As a giant warrior pirate, he has sailed the seas around the world and seen many other countries and many other kingdoms. And yet, despite all that, he has always returned back to Elbaf, a place cut off completely from the rest of the world. So, could it maybe just be that Jeru was stuck in his ways as a conservative old man who doesn't want a version of Elbaf based on peace and working with other nations? Could that be? Like, could it be that he views that sort of dynamic as weak and dangerous to his own country, and that's why a true warrior like Loki, someone that Jeru could easily convince to overthrow Harold, would then be the perfect target for his plan? And I would argue that that makes a decent amount of sense, seeing as Harold was hailed as the most peaceful leader of the giants, a man or giant who was so dedicated to change that he cut off his own horns from his head to separate himself more from the ancient giant blood heritage that flowed through him, connecting him to the more violent past of Elbaf. Guys, think about it. If Jeru didn't want Elbaf to be peace-oriented, or maybe he felt like they needed to stay a warrior nation to protect themselves from the world government and other nations, he could have just been slowly making plays to ensure that the king would be overthrown or ultimately just lose his status altogether. I actually think that the ancient giant stuff here might also be a hint at how much more brutal times used to be just a few hundred years ago in Elbaf. Again, Jeru is the oldest giant and he might have actually dealt with multiple people just like Harold who have direct ties to the ancient giants, seeing how prosperous the true warriors of Elbaf actually were and how powerful they were. And funnily enough, I think this could actually tie in very well with Jeru and Loki's first introduction to the series as well. In case you don't remember, Jeru was actually introduced first alongside Jeru, his co-captain, during Big Mom's backstory. Now it seems like Big Mom killed Jeru in her hunger rage and then was eventually booted out of Elbaf, but knowing that she had this immense power based on seeing it firsthand, Jeru might have been the one to suggest Loki's marriage to Lola to begin with as a way to ensure Elbaf protection by allying himself with Whole Cake Island and a Yonko. And if we stick with this idea for a moment, this then failed attempt at a marriage might have been Jeru's first plan to bolster Elbaf, as Harold was pushing them further away from being a warrior country, opening them up to foreign influence. And when the marriage thing didn't work, he then started to stoke the flames of Loki's rebellious and chaotic nature, because that way he'd be able to overthrow his father. Again, as an elder, as the eldest, someone people would probably trust in Elbaf, it would make sense then why Jeru was around during Loki and Harold's battle, since it makes sense for him to be in the castle. Or as a hero of Elbaf, he could have maybe also known that he'd be one of the first to stop the fight when it kind of kicked off. Plus, of course, guys, if that was his plan to begin with, then he'd be in a much better spot here to survive the fight, as Loki wouldn't be trying to actively kill Jeru, considering he's been guiding him the entire time in secret. And honestly, potentially, he might still be doing that right now, but we'll be getting to that in just a moment. Because first, I need to talk about something that's been bothering me for a while, which is that a sword went apparently straight through his head, and he very conveniently did not die from that. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I do think that this should probably kill you, and I mean, Luffy thinks the same thing. And I gotta say, folks, we really gotta hand it to Oda here, because what's there not to love about this chapter? chapter. And speaking of love, let me quickly go check in with my good friend, the Fleet Admiral, who knows a thing or two about spreading love as well, I think. Yes, hi there, hello. I'm the Fleet Admiral. I've been traveling your universe for my own great adventure, and just like my good friend and colleague Monkey D. Garb, the two things that I love most in this world are my family and tasty snacks. And since Garb and I have been recently informed that the Fist of Love is technically a quote-unquote felony, I've decided to channel my love in a way that's both delicious and morally acceptable with Tokyo Treat's Sweet Valentine Snack Box. Turns out this thing here is a fun and exclusive Japanese subscription box with a different theme every single month. And this month is Sweet Valentines with love-inspired treats straight from Japan. Perfect for sharing, I hear, or keeping it all to yourself. Take these red and white Kit Kats, for example. They were my only way out that time I got stranded on Amazon Lily. Yes, and also let's not forget about the Koikea farm salt and seaweed chips that I shared with Garp before the big battle of God Valley. Yeah, I gotta admit that does sound a little bit better than getting punched in the face, I guess. Yes, and don't sleep on this cultural guidebook here, folks. It's not just about snacks. It's actually full of facts about Japan. And did you know, for example, that Valentine's there is all about giving chocolate? So whether you're treating yourself, gifting it to your loved one, or, just trying to buy yourself free passage through Whole Cake Island with the sweet strawberry mochi here, Tokyo Treat is the perfect way to do it. And you can use the code Ohara to get $5 on your first Tokyo Treat order. Now back to you, good sir. Now in chapter 1137, we do see a ton of dead bodies from Loki and Harold's battle. It was a freaking massacre in there, and it's kind of weird that they just left all the bodies there. And you know what else is actually super interesting? Turns out I think that the sword in Jeru's head here has the same sword guard as King Harold's sword from the portrait that Road points to as well. Very, very interesting, I'd say. Now I don't know what you think, but to me this kind of points to either Harold attacking Jeru for backstabbing him, or maybe Jeru then took Harold's sword after the battle and used it to frame how Loki and Harold's fight went in his own favor. Because if that sword was Jeru's doing and he ended up stabbing himself in the head, not lethally, I guess he could have just taken the helmet off and done it like that way, but as a way to convince everyone that Loki had gone completely mad after he killed his own father, let's be real guys, it probably never even pierced his head to begin with and might just be specifically designed or positioned that way to look like that went through the helmet and he then does not take it off. And all of this might have been the final step in his big plan, a way to frame Loki as the big villain and then put himself back into power finally as a way to course correct Elbaf in his own favor. After all, we have been told also in Elbaf that the chiefs kind of want to do their own thing and don't really agree with anyone else taking the lead in general, whether Harold or Loki. So I'm curious how you're seeing it so far, but to me it kind of all adds up pretty nicely. So how would he have done it? Well, first off, he could have just been very straightforward, but that kind of seems unlikely. What seems much more likely to me is that he used Loki's loneliness and rejection and chaotic nature as a way of controlling him through a hidden alias. Mosa, or Shaggy in the official translation, because I mean, the transponder snail that Loki uses to talk to his longtime friend is a very hairy snail, very suspicious, and Luffy even points out when he meets Jeru that he's practically a walking and talking hill of hair. Like seriously, whether this guy's good or bad, he does need a haircut. But considering that Loki says that they've been friends for a very long time based on some cruel twist of fate, it does seem to me that Mosa has been taking advantage of Loki's kind nature and instead might have turned him into a weapon. And again, Jeru being Mosa makes a lot of sense, not only from the visual thing from the Denden Mushi, but also if this secret plot actually took place, letting him still have power over Loki even after getting him exiled and imprisoned. But I do think that there's actually yet another angle just as likely that explains some of the other twists and turns that we've been getting in Elbaf so far as well. Because guys, consider this. What if Jeru is the one who actually wants to join the world government here and Loki and Harold were his final big obstacles here? This would also make a ton of sense, seeing as he had some sort of relationship with Mother Caramel, sus living in the same village as her, and this plan might have all well even started because Big Mom murdered his good friend Jeru to begin with. So let's say that Jeru wanted to kill Big Mom, one of the fiercest pirates on the sea. Like, what would be the two easiest ways to do it? In my mind, it kind of comes down to getting close to her through Loki's marriage to Lola, or her joining the world government and destroying her that way. Or it's just as fair to say that Jeru set up Jeru getting killed by Big Mom as so that one less person would be in his way when he eventually took the throne for himself. Now, this option to me seems a little bit less likely, as in chapter 876, it kind of seems to show Jeru almost killing an unconscious Lin for murdering his best friend, but there is then also the idea that seeing fighters like Shanks, Big Mom, or even Kaido dominate the seas has kind of made Jeru think that giants are not anymore strong enough to hold their own anymore. From his eyes, it might be that joining the world government could be the only way to actually help Elbaf survive, and heck, maybe Jeru is actively part of the scheme right now to weaken Elbaf by sending strong children like Big Mom out to sea with Mother Caramel. Now, this is a little bit of a side tangent, honestly, but this would actually also potentially explain something about another giant character whose backstory is really mysterious, Kaido here, because something I noticed, and maybe you noticed this as well, it's so obvious when reading chapter 1137, is just look at this. Just how similar does King Harold look to Kaido? I mean, they have the same beard, same face shape, and obviously the giant ancient giant horns. I guess Harold cut his off, but what if Kaido is actually from Elbaf and has ancient giant blood just like Loki and Harold, and he says Oni, but you know, I personally think that Oni and ancient giants could potentially be just the same race in One Piece. But then Jeru might have made sure that he got sold off as a child. Again, Mother Caramel was right there to the West Blue, and this might even help explain why Big Mom took such a liking to him as a mentor, seeing as she knew firsthand what he had gone through. Actually, now that I think about it, Mother Caramel was probably already dead when Kaido was a kid, but I mean, you know, Jeru could have still just kept going with what they had been doing there anyways. Maybe someone else took over for Mother Caramel. I gotta say though, I'm a little bit biased here, as I'm a major defender of the idea that the Onigashima skull is a massive ancient giant skull, and it would be a really cool parallel if Kaido was an ancient giant descendant living inside an even bigger actual ancient giant skull. But hey, Oda did kind of make a point of bringing up ores specifically in chapter 1136, and that's kind of enough to give me some hope here, especially considering the point that I brought up earlier about ores and Jeru's timelines being pretty close to each other, at least for a giant, I think. Regardless of all of that, guys, to me it kind of seems that Jeru here is pulling some sort of twisted strings behind the scenes, and it could help explain one other massive plot point in recent chapters in Elbaf. I'm talking about a huge issue that I've been having with everything going on in how Shamrock and Gunko just popped up in Elbaf like that. Like, why has this never been done before? Why now? Why not at literally any other point in the last 14 years since Harold's death? I would think that that's a pretty fair question, right? I mean, all things considered though, Jeru might again be the most obvious answer here. If he is Mosa and he's finally in power and has Loki captive, he'd be the perfect person to tell the world government where to find Loki, how to break into Elbaf without getting, you know, caught at all, teleporting directly into the abandoned castle, and how to avoid everyone but those few guards blocking their way. And again, you know, potentially Jeru could have experienced trafficking other giants like Kaido as well. On top of that, Jeru does seem to know more about Nika and the end of the world, at least more than most people, and that's why Oda used him to explain it to us, the audience, what is actually going on here. So maybe the awakening of the Nika fruit and Luffy's arrival on Elbaf is what truly kicked Jeru into action, and why Shamrock and Gunko are here right now when the Straw Hats are here out of all times. For example, I think that it's possible that Jeru might have offered Loki up to the world government in exchange for their protection or their integration into the world government, seeing the end of the world is now approaching and, you know, the world might flood again. But what he probably isn't expecting is Loki's blatant refusal of the Holy Knights and his freedom, which is another great point in my books that Loki is a good guy, at least potentially. You know, the world government are bad guys, and everyone who's an enemy of my enemy is my friend, I guess. And I definitely think that the probability that Jeru might be pulling at least some of the strings here is pretty high, and actually, you know, him being Mosa could, you know, like make a lot of sense here as well, playing some angle to control and tame Loki. But there are actually two other big candidates that we should cover as well in this mystery, so let's go to the second most likely, the big bald guy, the big bad guy, Harold. Guys, am I the only one whose alarm bell bells went off when King Harold was just constantly referred to being like the most peaceful king who made the strides to connect Elbaf to the outside world through peace, communication, and trade. Like, it sounds a little bit too good to be true, right? He's the one who started the trend that we're seeing right now in school, where the kids are now hoping to be scholars and productive members of society instead of, you know, brutal, rough warriors. But what if this wasn't for a good reason like we kind of would expect? What if Harold's plan was actually to destroy this kingdom from the inside out and wanted to join the world government? Now, in this version of Betrayal, Jeru could have known this and helped by overseeing Mother Caramel's operations to ship giants off to Elbaf and bolster the strength of other nations and selling giants to the world government as soldiers. But if Harold wanted to pacify the nation of Elbaf altogether, there's only one possible person really who could have been a big issue to this. And yes, we love rhetorical questions, but the answer is of course his son Loki, who still has that true warrior spirit of Elbaf and also the ancient giant blood. You know, a kid who could grow up to defeat him, which is exactly what might have ended up happening here. That could be the prophecy of his son murdering him that Jeru actually mentioned himself in chapter 1136. Again, one of these weird details here. And since Harold might have wanted Elbaf to join the world government, he might have used Jeru to provoke Loki into attacking him, because that way he'd have a reason to kill his own son, who was in the way. Clearly, that exactly didn't work out, and so then the only course of action to ensure that Elbaf would join the world government was Loki being framed for it as being a murderer, a villain, and a brute, and that way Jeru at least could carry out Harold's will instead. And then, all of a sudden, the actual sun god, Luffy, appears on Elbaf, and it's the perfect time to, you know, summon the Holy Knights and finally take care of the loose threat that still is Loki. Okay, hold on. Like, I mean, again, I'm a big fan of this idea of the big betrayal, and I do think the chances for it are high, but I also have to play my own devil fruit advocate here. I also think that it's just as likely, of course, that Jeru would be totally against Harold's ideas to be peaceful and uses Loki to defeat him instead. Because after all, what is a One Piece theory or a One Piece arc if it doesn't have some complex political espionage, coups, and some decent level of self-destruction? And the idea here is that Harold is known as a fierce warrior with a powerful devil fruit and ancient giant blood, and that kind of sounds like a true nightmare. And Jeru, the hero, might not have been strong enough to defeat him himself, so Jeru had to pick out one of the two princes in order to defeat him. And of course, based on Hyrule being probably way too weak and not having a claim to the actual throne, despite being the better leader, I guess, Jeru might have had to rely on Loki here. Because let's face it, Loki doesn't seem like he had a lot of friends based on his childish antics, and Mosa appearing to be his friend and inspiring him to become the sun god of destruction, you know, could have just been enough here to create the monster that we see today. After all, it's been pretty heavily implied by Oda, I think, that Loki was told a story about Mosa being treated poorly, and this story might even be about his own father Harold or outsiders doing something bad to them. And if that were to be a lie that Jeru used to stoke the flames of anger inside of Loki's heart, then there's pretty much no wonder that he would go and fight his own father and try to become the true sun god. But then again, seeing as Jeru knows that Loki isn't fit to be king, he kind of frames him as a bad guy and then exiles him, but then Loki goes a little bit crazy and Red Hair Shanks is called in to stop him and imprison him, potentially. Alright, with that, the two most obvious suspects are off the table, but there is one more sneaky snake slithering through the shadows here as well that I think we should at least for a moment address, and, you know, we're talking about the bastard son, Jon Hyrule.
I'm a snake. I'm so slithering and sneaky because I'm a snake.
The younger brother of Prince Loki. Actually, he is the older brother. Is he the older brother? He's the older brother. I just realized that. All right, well. The older brother of Prince Loki has all the motive in the world himself laid out in the recent chapters as well, I think. You see, in chapter 1137, we find out that Hyrule isn't able to claim the throne due to the fact that his mother was a giant from outside of Elbaf, kind of like Saul. So I do think he kind of has got a little bit of that Jon Snow thing going on, minus the part where he actually is the true king in secret, but there is one way to prove that he's fit to be a king of Elbaf, which would be defeating the cursed prince, which is his brother Loki. Now, we do know that he wanted, of course, to claim the Mera Mera no Mi back in Dressrosa, even though my script says Mero Mero no Mi, which would be pretty funny. That is a funny typo, but no, the Mera Mera no Mi, the Flame Fruit, which he wanted to try to use to become king of Elbaf, and it's growing more and more likely that he wanted that fruit specifically, I think, to become the sun god, something every giant wants to become, we're being told. And actually, another really interesting detail that popped up when I was discussing this video with my team members pretty last minute was that one of my team members pointed out that Harold actually died 14 years ago, which weird by itself timeline-wise, but also that the rubber fruit, the Nika fruit, was stolen from the world government 13 years ago. And so this does leave a somewhat reasonable chance that after Loki killed Harold, the legendary fruit of Elbaf, which might have been Luffy's Nika fruit, got sold, smuggled out, or given to the world government intentionally by someone like Jeru. This could actually be the reason why Loki went on a crusade afterwards, where he rampaged throughout the world looking for the legendary devil fruit of Elbaf, and then Hyrule went to sea looking for it as well, potentially. Maybe he even got confused and thought it might have been the flame fruit. And actually bringing it back to Hyrule now, we also know that this guy was bullied and that his mother was harassed as well for being a false giant from the outside world. And Hyrule is fairly weak, I gotta say, at least based on what we saw in Elbaf. Luffy one-shots him compared to the likes of Harold, Loki, and even Dory and Broggy. And so what I'm saying here is maybe he's the one who manipulated the situation so that he could get Loki imprisoned in the underworld, eventually becoming weak enough for Hyrule to defeat him, because this way he could prove that he's qualified to be king and unite all the giant kingdoms. And now that I think about it, it could actually explain why this arc starts with a super random prelude with Road, as we just learned that Road follows Hyrule because he was also an outcast. And so maybe this is all just tying into the fact that Hyrule is going to play a much darker and much more evil role, becoming the false sun god like his subordinate. Again, kind of sus when you think about it that, you know, Road worked for Hyrule. And guys, while I want to make it clear that I think that this is actually the least likely option, I do also think it would maybe be the coolest option when it comes to potential story issues further on if Hyrule, out of all people, was a bad guy. It would of course be yet another step in the trend that Bartolomeo set up, where the Straw Hat Grand Fleet is causing a lot of problems throughout the entire world in Luffy's name, claiming random countries, overthrowing power structures, but not in a good way like we see Luffy usually doing in every single arc. And on top of that, it would definitely give a lot better context to the line from chapter 800 after the Grand Fleet is established, because after this moment, they will each grow in power until they eventually cause a great incident of historic proportions, is what the manga says. So maybe that was an understatement, and at the hands of Hyrule, the Straw Hat Grand Fleet will eventually cause Ragnarok, the literal end of the world. For now though, guys, the Straw Hat Pirates do need to first survive Elbaf, and the biggest obstacle right now is standing right in their way, because Figaland Shamrock has hit the scene, and if he's just anything like his doppelganger Shanks, and I mean, we can expect that he is, he's gonna be a fighter with unbelievable levels of power. So what could this guy be up to? Why is he on Elbaf right now? And what else does that all mean? To find that out, you can check out my chapter review that we just dropped 2 days ago for chapter 1137 in more detail, focusing more on that, where I do go everything in much more detail. Again, there are some really cool ideas in that shape and break the entire Elbaf arc if they turn out to be true, so check that out below me. Big shout out to all my Patreons. We upload a lot of stuff every week, bonus content, early access to Patreons, just recorded one with Giguk and the Anime Man, that's gonna be up there soon. You guys can ask questions and much more. Appreciate everyone who's already part of that and helps the channel, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.